Merry Christmas to one and all. If you're not celebrating Christmas today, I hope you're at least taking the time to enjoy whichever religious observation you follow with your families. And to those of you going through the day under different circumstances, I hope this episode is a bit of a treat for you nonetheless. And lastly, to those going through today under more unimaginable circumstances, I hope that this podcast might be a bright spot in your day. To all of our military deployed overseas and those emergency services and hospital personnel on staff today, from one veteran to all of you, thanks for looking after us this year. Without further delay, let us move into our episode and the next iteration of the Folklore Appendices to explore the haunting story of the Christmas Devil, the one they call Krampus. The idea of a Christmas devil is thought to even predate the coming of Christianity and has its roots in the people of the Alps. It's reflected in the early traditions of people in the Central and Eastern Alps regions. From this ideology was born Krampus, the half-goat, half-demonic monster who punishes, takes, and sometimes eats evil children. He was originally believed to have been part of many pagan rituals surrounding the winter solstice. According to pagan legends, he was the son of Hel, the Norse god of the underworld. The celebrations incorporated the character Krampus as far back as the 6th or 7th centuries. With that in mind, the legend of Krampus was not actually recorded until sometime in the late 16th century. Anthropologist John Honigmann was able to observe some traditions in Austria in 1975, of which he had the following to say. The St. Nicholas festival we are describing incorporates cultural elements widely distributed in Europe, in some cases going back to pre-Christian times. Nicholas himself became popular in Germany around the 11th century. The feast, dedicated to this patron of children, is only one winter occasion, in which children are the objects of special attention, others being Martinmas, the Feast of the Holy Innocents, and New Year's Day. Masked devils, acting boisterously and making nuisances of themselves, are known in Germany since at least the 16th century, while animal masked devils, combining dreadful comic antics, appeared in the medieval church plays. A large amount of literature, much of it by European folklorists, bears these subjects. Austrians, in the community we studied, are quite aware of the heathen elements being blended with Christian elements in the St. Nicholas customs and in other traditional winter ceremonies. They believe Krampus derives from a pagan supernatural who was assimilated to the Christian devil. The figures of Krampus would only persist through the ages. Around the time of the 17th century, Krampus had been fully incorporated into Christian celebrations, pairing him as the dark reflection to St. Nicholas. Even his name is menacing. It is derived from the German word Krampen, or claw. But not all traditions are fully accepted everywhere. Following the 1932 election in Austria, the Krampus tradition was outlawed by the clerical fascist Fatherland Front and the Christian Social Party. This would continue until later parts of the 20th century, when Krampus would eventually begin to have a resurgence in popularity. Traditions born only 20 years ago that still exist today, as they're still largely centered to the Alps region, we're generally not exposed to them here in North America. However, Even those who haven't incorporated Krampus into their holiday observances and celebrations still have some general understanding of what it is. Krampus has been known to have a great amount of variations in his appearance. Most often, he is supernaturally large, hairy, and often has brown or black skin. He has cloven hooves, akin to that of the devil. He also has goat horns, a pointed tongue, and fangs. Krampus is often wrapped in chains, which are meant to symbolize the Catholic binding of the devil. The chains are used to scare his victims, as he will often thrash with them violently for effect. Depending on his legend, his chain may or may not have bells attached to it. In more pagan origins, Krampus carries with him a bundle of birch branches known as the root. It is used to swat at bad children. In some darker iterations of the character, the root is actually a whip. In most legends, Krampus carries a sack or basket on his back, which is used to cart off evil children. When they cannot escape the drowning, eating, or the dragging to hell that comes after their capture. Krampus is most popular in Europe, with many countries and regions taking part in the Feast of St. Nicholas on the 6th of December. The evening preceding it, however, is the Krampusnacht, or the Night of Krampus. During the night, Krampus appears on the streets of the local towns. Sometimes he will accompany St. Nicholas, but often comes on his own. He makes time to visit local homes and businesses. During this night, St. Nicholas will only concern himself with children who have been deemed good, while Krampus bears responsibility for all others, gifting them with coal and striking them with the root. Overall, Krampus has been noticed in the following places: Austria, Bavaria, Croatia, Czechia, Hungary, northern Italy, and Trento, Tyrol, Slovakia, and Slovenia. In the Austrian state of Styria, each family is presented with a root, painted in gold. This root is displayed the entire year round as a reminder to children that may have forgotten him that Krampus is always watching. In more rural areas, Krampus may bring with him antlered sidekicks, and St. Nicholas is rarely seen. These companions are known as either the Schapmänner or the Rauhen. Throughout other parts of Europe, different legends exist that share similarities to Krampus. Fans of The Office will know the alias known as the Belschnickel. Others may know the moniker Knecht Ruprecht. All of the individuals border the reaches of the macabre, or the just plain strange. One of the lighter festivities, again centered on Austria, is an event known as the Krampuslauf, or the Krampus Run. Although this event isn't tied to a specific time or day, it allows Austrian men the chance to get drunk, don the traditional garb of Krampus, and run around the streets to scare children. The 1890s also brought an interesting gift of their own. In countries like Germany and Austria, Krampuskarten, or Krampus cards, began to make their rounds. They would always read, Gruß vom Krampus, and weren't meant to bring holiday cheer or the warm and fuzzies. They would often show Krampus stuffing frightened children into a sack or preparing to strike them with the root. There weren't many better alternatives, as others would show him leading children away in chains or toting him off in his sack. It wouldn't be until many years later that North America was introduced to the legend. In 2004, a graphic designer named Monty Beauchamp published a book of these Krampuskarten and would even organize an entire show for his artwork. It's not quite clear if it was Beauchamp who introduced them to North America, but the countries would have embraced the legend nonetheless. Peaking, of course, with a Hollywood comedic horror movie bearing the iconic name in 2015. Now that we know about Krampus, and his impacts on Christmas throughout the world, let's take the time to tell a story of Krampus. This reading is a short story by John Frank Marshall titled The Krampus. Ivan Krachev sat on the cottage roof, mending tiles in the heat of the August sun. His back ached. He could see his daughter enjoying the garden shade, leaning against the warm bark of the old apple tree and playing her guitar. He paused to write down the music she was composing and experienced a surge of irritation. Yulia, have you noticed me working whilst you do nothing? She pushed her shaggy black hair away from her face. Her classical features could have graced a Greek vase, but were spoiled by anger at his interruption. How couldn't I notice, when you're making so much noise? You see me trying to work too. Ivan shook his head disbelievingly and was about to raise his voice in angry response when an owl called, its quavering cry unnatural in the bright sunlight. Another replied from close by. He scanned the surrounding forest, using a large hand to shield his eyes from the sun. He wondered what could have awakened them. A faint memory stirred, and with it came the first twinge of fear. In the distance, the roofs and spires of Saint Austell shimmered sleepily in the heat haze until a barrage of heavy clouds slid across the sky, dimming it a light, sickly green. The first hailstones exploded on the hot tiles. By the time he had entered the cottage, the hail was torrential, coating the garden white. Yulia was putting on eyeshadow in front of the tarnished mirror in the gloomy hall. She pointedly ignored him as he shook the hail from his clothes. Are you seeing that boy again? Ivan rumbled, trying to sound neutral. Yes, if you must know, he'll be here any moment, and his name's David, by the way. Ivan counted to 5. Don't be late, all right. Before midnight. You are only 17. She looked at him, as if considering whether to make an issue of it. Dad, he's not going to rape me. We're saying friends. Stay cool. Later, when he managed to achieve cool, Ivan sat reading his Bible, soothed by solitude, until an unwelcome sound intruded. Water running, somewhere upstairs. Another memory, another scalp tingle. He put down the book with a sigh and listened. Pattering footsteps, the scratch of nails on wood. Perhaps a squirrel in the room above. He grunted irritably and heaved himself to his feet. He entered the bathroom and shook his head. One of the bath taps was running. Ivan turned it off tightly and opened the bedroom door cautiously. He could not find the source of the noise, and so he closed the windows. He also shut the airing cupboard door before descending. The air had become chill, and owls were calling incessantly. He felt tense, and his head ached. Before Yulia returned, Ivan had to turn off the same tap twice more. Each time, the airing cupboard door was open, the brass knob icy cold. He knew then that it had returned. When she entered, he had to tell her, Yulia, listen, we need to leave here. It's not safe. Pack your things. She tossed her head defiantly, reminding him of her mother. You can't order me around like that. Tell me, what's going on? He raised his arms and then let them fall. Can you not do anything you are told? I will not explain why to you, Yulia. Do as I say for once. She jutted her lip. Basically, no way. You can't hurt me like you hurt Mum, but I'm not going anywhere. I'll tell the police if you try to make me." Her voice rose until she was shouting. Ivan looked around, put a finger to his lips, and whispered, "For God's sake, do not shout. I never hurt her. I loved her. Why don't you believe me?" She clenched her fists. "Because no one else could have done it. I saw the bruises when she came down to breakfast each morning. I hate you." She hissed the words at him. He sat down warily by the simple pine table. "Listen, she left us to stay alive. It would have killed her if she had stayed, like it killed my mother." He regretted the words as soon as they were spoken. "It? What happened to your mother?" "I do not want to talk about her. It was a long time ago. Whatever. I'm not leaving this house." His heavy brow creased. "As you wish. We will talk tomorrow when you are calm. It is time you knew the truth. It will not be easy." Ivan slept fitfully, haunted by images from his childhood. His family had traveled along the mountains from one country to another before settling in Slovenia, and his grandmother Petra lived as a recluse. However, on his 10th birthday she had been unusually friendly and invited him to her tiny cottage for tea and cake. Once inside, her mood changed. "Ivan, I have to tell you something important." She spoke in a hoarse whisper, interrupted by wheezes. He was not sure what she wanted him to know. "Now eat up, boy. We must go to the church. It is not safe to talk here." It was harvest. The warm, still air pooled within the ring of mountains that had encircled his village. He followed the gnarled figure across the sun-baked square to the dim, musty church. To his surprise, she locked the heavy doors behind her, dragged him to a pew, and the small boy shivered in the blood-red light of the stained glass window. It depicted a priest defying a demon. The creature was small, but terrifying, surrounded by a halo of black flame, and seemed to stare at the boy. Petra sat next to him and whispered in his ear about the Krampus. Half demon, half goat, shaggy and horned with a long tongue, the Krampus beat naughty children and even took them to hell or devoured them. How it gained in size by feeding on fear, sometimes a tiny imp, other times a monster. How it masqueraded as other spirits, appearing as a Santa Claus or boggarts, the way it persecuted generations in search of something inexplicable. When she finished, he ran home and cried in his room, birthday forgotten. By November, Petra's tale had come to life. Bruises started to appear on his mother's arms and face until they were a mass of blue and purple wheals. After Krampus knocked, she lost her sight and could no longer work, and the other villagers shunned her. She spent her last months in the nunnery, dying mysteriously in her sleep and quickly buried. Even now, Ivan still dreamed of the demon in the church window. He saw the Krampus opening his bedroom door in the mist of darkness. A bent, crooked thing, dragging chains and holding a hammer in its clawed hand. Ivan must have dozed, because he awoke with a start. He could hear a clicking noise, like a fishing reel being slowly turned. He arose and peered at the moonlit garden through the veil of frost and saw nothing, but the feeling of malevolence was almost tangible. At 3 a.m., Julia came in, clutching blankets about her. "I heard something scraping the window. It sounded like fingernails." She shivered. "God, why is it cold? I'm freezing." He stroked her hair, ignoring the blasphemy. "It's all right. You heard the branches in the wind. Now I will sleep in that big chair in your room." When Julia awoke in the morning, Ivan had already left to work on a house in the town, and so after breakfast, she settled in the garden to work on her music. The mix of emotion and melody absorbed her until a harsh scream made her jump. A tawny owl landed in the apple tree and stared straight at her with glowing eyes. But something else was also watching. A malignant presence was in the darkness under the rhododendrons, and she could hear a low clicking like a Geiger counter. Fighting the urge to run, she peered closer and froze. An earth-brown face, ancient and cruel, was staring at her, framed by the leaves. It was gone in an instant, but she caught a glimpse of pointed ears and discolored teeth. She was so frightened she could barely breathe, and a powerful instinct made her grab her guitar and run for the house. When Ivan returned, the door was locked, and Yulia was organizing her sheet music distractedly. She hugged him tightly. "Something's in the garden. It was horrible. It was listening to me singing." To her surprise, he took her hands. "Look at your arms." She gasped at the numerous small wheals, as if they had been beaten. "They don't look like Mum's. I don't know what caused it. I didn't feel anything. I didn't do anything." The significance of it brought her to tears. "I'm so sorry, Dad." Ivan shook his head. "It is the Krampus." His voice was low. "It has found us, the last of the Krachevs. They never give up. Never." She gripped his hand. "Is it dangerous?" "It is very dangerous, despite its size. The Krampuses are jealous, and they feed on anger, but it makes them angry too." She felt sick. "That scraping at the window, it was trying to get into my room." Ivan went upstairs, his daughter close behind. He opened the window and showed her the deep scratches cut into the wood. "See, it has a long nail on each hand, sharp like a knife, and if it attacks, it goes for the eyes first." He hooked his forefingers. Outside, the wind was rising and thunder grumbled. "Have you seen a Krampus?" He shook his head. "No. Old Petra told me they carry a weapon, a hammer or an axe, I think, and a bag of clay they use to bind with. You cannot catch them or hurt them, and no one would try, because their vengeance would be terrible. She told me that they are always freezing cold. They love music, warm places, and the sound of running water. They see through the eyes of owls." "So what do we do?" "It will leave only when given the perfect gift, something it wants very much, but if it does not like the offering, beware." Julia frowned. "So what does it want from us?" "I don't know. Before we offered everything we had, but it only became more violent. We must think again. Meanwhile, no raised voices, and no bad tempers." "That's why it hurt me. Because I was angry with you," she said to herself, rubbing her arms. "I have the gift. It's me. It wants me. I don't know what to do." "No," he roared. "We go now. Pack your bags." "It's your turn to trust me," she begged, squeezing his rough hand. "Please let me try." Julia spent much of the next 2 days in her bedroom. Ivan heard her singing and playing, the music gradually taking shape, a sculpture of sound. As she composed, the weather grew wilder, and the sleet rattled on the windows. From time to time, Ivan patrolled the house fearfully, and he left the outside tap running in hopes that the Krampus would stay in the garden. But when darkness fell, The owls seemed to be hooting down the chimneys, and Ivan knew it was somewhere in the house, listening to her. The next morning, no birds dared sing under the leaden sky. The leaves had started to turn russet, even though it was midsummer. Yulia walked across the lawn and settled under the apple tree with her guitar, whilst Ivan stood on the patio, watching fearfully. Then she began to play, and her voice joined in, its soft richness expressing deep sadness and joy. The song pulled at his heart. It came. The light shrank away so that the Krampus shrouded in darkness, and it clicked angrily. It was no longer small, but a huge, shadowy figure. Without thinking, Ivan shouted in Slovenian, "Leave her alone, you have no right!" Ivan did not see the Krampus move, but it was in front of him instantly. An immense weight seemed to bear down on his neck, forcing him to his hands and knees, staring at the cloven hooves of the thing. He felt nauseous, as if tumbling over and over, unaware of the ice glazing his skin, or the two long daggers of bone prickling at his eyelids. But Yulia's voice cut through his senses, growing in emotion, singing for his life, and the Krampus turned away from him. Looping back to her, Ivan's head swam, and he blacked out. He regained consciousness moments later and knew instantly that the Krampus had gone, but Yulia was still sitting under the tree, pale and unmoving. Ivan staggered across the frosty grass to her, shouting her name. "Dear God, please be all right," he prayed, and he opened her eyes. He knelt beside her, ashamed of his cowardice, as warm sunlight broke through the clouds, and a blackbird began to sing. "It's returned, wherever it came from," she said. "It wanted to hear love. That was all." And with that, we bring to the close our story, The Legend of Krampus, the Christmas Devil, in addition to the short story. I wanted to thank you very much for listening and choosing to spend Christmas Day with me. For you cryptid lovers, I hope you enjoyed this edition of the Folklore Appendices. If I can ask for a small Christmas gift, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening from. Because subscriptions, as Cousin Eddie once said, are the gift that keeps on giving the whole year round. If you're listening on YouTube, give a thumbs up or leave a comment. I'd really appreciate it. As this was a special bonus episode just for Christmas, we still have our regular episode coming up on Tuesday, when we'll explore the story of the disappearance of Tom and Eileen Lonergan, the famous Australian case that inspired the 2003 film Open Water. New episodes of the Insidious Agenda podcast release every Tuesday at 5 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. But for now, it's time to close the cover of the Insidious Agenda. Thank you very much for listening. Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.